All right. Hello, everybody. I'm doing this kind of blind because I can't see the cameras, but I'm Jason. I'm joined here with Dave, and Neil will be with us shortly, and we are UX is Fine. We're going to give a little bit of a chat about, really a journey going from my consultancy from a few years back to our consultancy, and basically a little bit of a dive into how I got here and then how we got where we're going and where we're going next. And hope to entertain you with this. I'm going to get started. We're going to do some back and forth with my partners, and then we'll open up to some questions about halfway or so through, and look forward to hearing your questions and engaging with you all and learning more about what you're up to and how your work is going. So a little bit about me. I started out in graduate school. I studied how judges and juries made decisions. This was about 30 years ago, almost, well, maybe 25 years ago. And really what it did was it gave me a big appreciation for science and the scientific method. And if you look at the column on the right, it's really like the game devs here, which are all of us, we should see something pretty familiar. And the scientific method is actually very similar to the game development method, right? It's a very iterative approach. You do your research, you build hypotheses, which are prototypes in games, you test them out, how well do they do, you make fixes based on what you learn. Sometimes you can fix it in the game you're working on, sometimes it's not till the next game, and then you learn from that and move on. And in the academic world, we're going to talk a little bit here about some of the questions and decisions I made, and then we made as we moved along. And I could break them down into sort of external factors that I was asking about, my personal well-being, because I believe that that's an important thing to consider. And then where you are in your life in terms of trying to achieve those goals that you have, financial or some sort of success. And really at that place, when I was in graduate school, I was broke, but I was a broke grad student, and so it wasn't really a desperate situation. But as it turned out, I did really well at like doing research and publishing and stuff. But I was also super clinically depressed, like towards the end, not even able to like lift a pen to kind of work. And really what happened, I learned, is that I kind of fooled myself into like, achieving, doing well in terms of the achievement domain, really left me just kind of all out of juice in terms of the personal domain. And something had to change. What I discovered was that actually the skills that I learned at graduate school transferred to the tech industry. And so I started out working for a couple of companies. And this is where I found my love of user experience. And UX is Fine is obviously a user experience consulting company. And so just a little bit about that background. For people of my age, this was like a familiar and comfortable environment to do research in and answer questions. Job control language, doing queries, batch files, and stuff like that. But when I entered the job market, most of the people, even just 2 or 3 years younger than me, this was their experience with computers, and they didn't understand anything and were intimidated by a command line. I, trying to be the helpful person that I was, tried to sort of break it down for them and make it friendlier. So I'd make ASCII art. I'd like download ASCII art, and then I would use those to create text forms so they could commit their batch jobs. I didn't even know that user interface design or user experience was even a thing back then. But as it turned out, it was. I quickly moved from that into, once I realized it was a career, into like statistical software and interface design. And at about the same time, so this will date myself, I got back into games, and the two big games right around then, or at least the ones that caught my attention, were Half-Life and Planescape Torment. And I spent a lot of time on those games, as many of us I'm sure have. And I had that sort of, peanut butter and chocolate moment where I'm like, well, I should be able to combine these things, right? Like there's user interface in games and there's user interface in statistical software. Could I get my company to sort of like trust me that we could learn from games and apply it to not so much. And so externally here, when I came to like decisions of what comes next, externally, it was fine. I had a good job. It was well paying, especially for someone, fresh out of school, grad school. I had a really strong support network. I'd gone through my sort of depressive years, but I'd maintained a really good, strong foundation of friends. But I was bored at work, and I was and achievement-wise, I felt thwarted. I thought was some really good ideas about combining statistics and games, two things I really love. And I was starting to get the itch and did some side projects. Fate would have it that the company that I worked for would send me to the Computer Human Interaction Conference in Seattle that year of 2001. to study user experience. And really, for me, that would be a big opportunity to really learn formally what was going on in the field that I somehow found myself in. What happened was, though, I went to the Microsoft booth because I heard they were offering free beer and they were kind of hosting tonight at that time. And I met up with a bunch of people just like me who had burned out of grad school and then left grad school. And they actually went into the games industry and did games usability user testing. And Dungeon Siege was the big game there that, that was kind of shown. And I got to play Dungeon Siege before it was launched and thought that was really cool. And so this was another inflection point for me, again, comfort wise, my job's there. It's a pretty secure company. People have been there for a long time. I could probably stay there for a while. Personally, again, my support network was there for me. I was bored though, but achievement wise, this was a chance for me to think, hey, here's a chance to try the achievement route again. Plus, I got to work in games, which seemed more exciting even than statistics, and I love statistics. And then, there are, for all the haters of Microsoft and stuff, like, for me, that was kind of a prestigious thing going from a small software company to Microsoft. It seemed like a big opportunity to really, get my career going. So I joined Microsoft Games in the playtest and user testing group, and we watched a lot of people play a lot of games. And that's where one of the first games I worked on was Rise of Nations. And Dave, I'll just sort of cue you up here because I'm going to talk about the fact that this is where I met Dave. And Dave, if you want to give yourself just a quick introduction to the crowd.
Hi, everybody. Dave Inscore. I am now, I think, going into my 21st year of working in game development. Started off, went to art school here in Baltimore, Maryland Institute College of Art, got an internship at Microprose. Ended up landing there for a few years, left and was one of the earlier hires at Firaxis, founded Big Huge Games in 2000 from Big Huge Games. And that's where I got to meet Jason there at Microsoft and working on Rise of Nations together. One of my most fond experiences in all of game development. Rise of Nations will always be near and dear. And then left there, did a stint at Zynga. Then after that, joined up with some Big Huge alums and Sparky Pants and made some great products there. Got to work with Jason again, both at Zynga and Sparky Pants. And then just a few years ago, this all made sense to dive off. We'll be talking more about that into UX is Fine, and we've been having a great time ever since.
And Dave, first impression, do you remember like the first time you ever met me, what you thought?
Oh God, I hope we don't discover something that's going to make us change a bunch of art. I think that's my first impression of meeting anyone at Microsoft. First impressions, though, just I remember going to some of those test sessions and meeting you there, and there was just something about. I mean, it's why we were able to steal you away from Microsoft. Not long after that, it was everybody was on the same wavelength. We really took user testing, user experience, and particularly with the UI. Big Huge on Rise of Nations was big into UI, UX, reacting to the feedback from fans, and Jason, you were tied right into that. And I think Microsoft was just starting to dip their toes into that, and you were on the forefront. So that's why it all made sense.
Cool. I thought you were going to say something so much more embarrassing. But thank you. Apparently, broad work. So this let me. So yeah. So I worked there for a couple of years at Microsoft. But and what I was in was like this really I had this strong support network again. Externally, there's no reason to leave Microsoft, for instance, because they're a big company. They'll be around for a while, and sure, there's reorgs and stuff, but I felt pretty secure. But I was really in this learning and growth mode. Like I wanted to expand. I was really motivated by the people that I work with, both on the publishing side and the dev side. And achievement-wise, I felt like I had more to offer, and I didn't have time to waste. At Microsoft, I probably could have, done some different things or pursued some different career routes, but that would have taken time. And I was feeling old and like I didn't have a lot of time, and I wanted to sort of jumpstart my career there. And so I really wanted to start making games, not just being a participant on the sideline or providing a side service. And I wanted to have an education, everyone has, or a lot of people have a naive belief of what developing games are. As it turned out, when I joined Big Huge Games, this is kind of more where I found myself, because I joined as a producer, and this was a studio that was going through intense growth, internally doubling in size, from the initial 20 to 30 folks to over 60 folks on site, and then obviously the hundreds of folks required to support AAA games and publishing. And that turned out to be not quite the thing that was for me. And so towards the end, when I kind of burned out a little bit from that, I kind of got back to my roots and working on a smaller game, Catan, for Xbox, and remembered how much I enjoyed just working with folks, working on UX and UI, and that was really my kind of comfort zone. And so externally at that point, there was slight pressure there, because really at this point of my career at Big Huge Games, their 3-title deal with Microsoft had just fallen apart. It was likely that they would succeed, and so this cut both ways. On the one hand, maybe I should leave because who knows what's going to happen. But on the other hand, like, I formed these real strong bonds with these folks, and I actually felt confident in the student studio that they were going to just sign another deal, and so I wanted to be part of that as well. So it definitely, in terms of like the decisions that I had to make, it was a tough one to stay or go. On a personal well-being, I was with a bunch of folks who really liked being around me, and I liked being around. They supported me, but like, I was 36 and single, and like no good like family prospects on the horizon, and found myself depressed again. And I think I got a little too caught up in the achieving. I mean, working with a successful indie developer on multiple titles with hundreds of people that are really committed to the craft, it's just easy to get lost in it, and that's what happened to me. And I forgot to focus on things that made me sort of personally happy. And so I ended up in that repeating that graduate school experience, unfortunately. And so I decided to leave the games industry for just a little bit and join Amazon. And I say left the industry because, like, to date myself, this wasn't to leave Amazon to join Amazon Games, right? This was in 2007, before games were a thing at Amazon. And I worked in the community and social features. So how do we just help people make better purchase decisions, purchase with confidence based on customer reviews? How do we get people to write better ones? How do we get them summarized in ways that are easy for people to consume and feel confident in? And so then after a couple of years, though, I was at another inflection point, and I was like, well, Amazon's cool to work at, but it's like their stock isn't going to be worth anything. So, why stick around long? Whoops. But personally, like, my life was very balanced in terms of work life. This is the most best work life balance I've had in probably a decade or two. I was engaged to my now wife, but on the personal well-being side, I did miss building games with my game colleagues, and being able to socialize with them in a work relationship. And achievement-wise, I was kind of stagnating. I mean, I was, if you're at Amazon at that time and you don't have a pager, you're not really all that important in some ways. And I was definitely not on this sort of, career exec progression track or anything like that. I could have probably made, a longer term, stay there or whatever, but it wasn't like I was going to really go anywhere or achieve anything special there. I didn't feel. So I decided to break out on my own for the first time, and I offered user testing services to a bunch of different publishers. They had all learned from the stuff that I had been working on, several years prior, that they needed, the Microsoft capabilities, but they didn't obviously have the ability to staff up so quickly internally. So they just hired folks like myself to come in and work on their various titles and help. I would jet back around to the various different developers and run user testing on them and help them, fix the problems with their games. And really at that point, like, it was pretty smooth sailing. It was just me and my wife in a small apartment, and so I could afford to take financial risks. There was no big deal if I didn't make enough money. But planning for the future, kids are expensive. Who knows whether this is going to pay off long term. Personally, the work-life balance is great, and I've got a big, strong support network. And achievement-wise, this was interesting, and I only really thought about it more on sort of reflecting over the years. This is a time at which I became sort of known outside my initial small circle of people, and this is something that's really, when I talk to folks about, like, how important it is to sort of network and get known outside your core group. This is one of the big key features is how do you break outside your familiar friends and meet these new folks and work with them and develop those relationships. And I've been doing that in my consulting role. So I went back to the zoo, as they say. I joined up and with Frontierville after a bunch of consulting work for them, and we launched Frontierville, and that was a smash success for the time. And then we did Cityville too, which was not a smash success. And then I got the full experience of game dev at a big studio, which meant that the studio got to close. And then I joined a Disney studio and we made a Star Wars game, and the game didn't do well, and the game was shut down, and then the studio was shut down. And so then I was at another decision point. Externally, what's happening? Well, like, this is the games industry, right? It's just studio closures. How am I gonna? I don't have a job right now. What am I gonna do? I still had this strong support network and a great work-life balance, both at Zynga after I sort of backed it down a little bit. And at Disney, I had a great work-life balance. And achievement just seemed so much less important, at least in the business domain. Certainly in the family domain, I wanted to have happy family and kids and all that sort of stuff. So I was, what do I do now? Well, what I'd done before was, strike out on my own as a consultant. But this time, I had different considerations. I had a wife and I had 2 little wolf pup sons. And so I realized that this would be nice, but it wasn't going to be like me and my fiance at the time, 15 years prior, living in a small 2-bedroom apartment. There were other concerns on the table, so I needed to make sure that this worked. The other thing is that the world had changed in the intervening time. It wasn't quite this negative in terms of me looking around for work, but in the intervening years, a lot of the studios that would have grabbed me up for consulting work had used that time to rightly build up their own internal infrastructure, and there just wasn't as much need for consultants. And they had a pipeline of contractors, and for me, that would have been involved moving, taking less pay, and stuff like that, which wasn't really something that I wanted to do. But what really I had been exposed to at both Disney and Zynga was more like the new software as a service and games as a service models, and specifically how that tied into UX. And my philosophy and the way I worked with teams was tying UX directly into these key metrics that kept these games alive and profitable. And that actually was a very marketable thing, as it turned out, and led to a lot of my early consulting engagement, which was Backflip Studios, where I met Neil Edwards. And Neil, if you want to just give a quick intro to yourself and maybe say a thing or two about how we met, or your first impressions of me when you met me.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I am a game designer by trade, sort of turned, UX design. They're all kind of the same bundle to me. So yeah, I went to school in Chicago at a game design program because I wanted to get into the industry, but didn't know how. So at first I went the computer science route, and that very quickly did not work. So I ended up going to a game program, got an internship at Backflip. That was supposed to be 3 months, we'll ship you in, ship you out, you'll get your experience and we'll get our work. And, we don't hire our interns. I was very thankful, right place, right time. So that turned into a full-time gig. Ended up spending about 5 years there. Went from a game designer to you are the lead, you are in charge of the UI UX on Dragonvale World. And that was kind of the sequel to the flagship title that kind of built that studio and had a lot of early App Store success. But that was the beginning and middle of my and end of my job description. Other than my sensibilities as a game designer, I really had no idea what I was doing. And luckily, that's where Jay came in. So I was kind of, the way I describe it to people, I was the inside UX guy. He was the outside UX guy. So we were doing a lot of wireframing and prototyping together. And he was just, I would get on Skype calls with him, and he would help me out and kind of give me direction as kind of a more senior design person in the equation. And then from time to time, he would come to the studio and help us run usability tests. I remember those experiences always being fun and refreshing. And finally, getting a chance to meet Jay in person was really nice after just working, we'd work for 6 months at a time on Skype. I don't know that I remember particular first impressions. I think I remember, trying to soak up as much as I could, just because at the time I was so green, and I was still trying to learn so much, and I was definitely in probably 3 times over my head. and Jay was, one of the guys that kind of helped make me, make it work. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of Jay and I's origin story, and then kept in touch over the years. And when it was time for me to do something new, we had been in touch, and that's how kind of I got started with UX is Fine.
Yeah, we worked on. Thanks, Neil, and again, thanks for not like sharing super embarrassing information. Yeah, and the interesting thing to me as a consultant there, when Dragonvale World came sort of crashing down, or at least it was something for folks to think about who like want jobs at big studios or whatever that are kind of at the whims of like the game closes, the studio closes. This was, lesson number one for consulting and not putting all your eggs in one basket. This was very much a like, oh, okay, so 1/5 of my client load or income is now gone, and I need to figure out, how to do it. So something for folks to think about when they're thinking about, taking a job at a company versus going in the totally independent route, or working on consulting. Then, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Then this is one way to potentially, have more eggs and more baskets kind of thing. And so really, at this point, I've been working for a couple of years and doing the lone wolf kind of consulting thing. And, I did a check, and I'm like, well, externally, like I've got a house that we can all live in. We can put food on the table. My kids are wearing clothes mostly. And in terms of like personal well-being, it was like a good work-life balance. Like I really could get involved in the lives of my kids. I had to travel sometimes, but not usually very long. I could volunteer at their schools and things like that. And I didn't have like a boss ordering me around or forcing me to stay late at work. If I wanted to take the day off to play with the kids, I could. Or if you wanted to go travel or something like that, we could. But in terms of achievement, like, I was 47, and I'm like, what is my long-term goal? Am I going to have some sort of legacy or whatever? What am I building towards? I can't just do this forever. We all know that ageism is a thing, and eventually I'm going to be aged out of the industry. So where do I go from here? The other questions that I had as well were kind of like, a lot of the folks that I'm dealing with have other needs, and needs that I'm not necessarily able to fulfill, but that I might want to. There's like all this practical stuff for UI UX that people think about, wireframing, coming up with the mock-ups and things like that. And then as I go from this, huge ugly pile of ugliness, it might be nice to like be associated with work product that was beautiful. It looked great, and none of this stuff was kind of in my wheelhouse, or was I able to offer it, or anything like that. And this is like, definitely an over dramatic representation, but there was like a little bit of a void in terms of just like being on my own professionally for 3 years, almost 4 years, and it felt like there could be something more. And so, things happen. The games industry is kind of games industry. So, Dave transitioned a couple times at studios here, and Neil went through the backflip, diaspora. I, myself was sort of trying to figure out how to live on the edges of this in a way that could support my family and myself. But really, I was actually like feeling a lot of confidence in terms of what was going to go on. Like I still had this great support network. I still had this great work-life balance, but really this feeling of just like, it could be so much cooler. And that's where we kind of started off as UX is Fine. We had these conversations we had with each other about like, what would it be like to work together and not work for a game development studio? I'd already been working not in a game development studio for a while, so I kind of knew a bit about that and I could answer some questions. But for Neil and Dave, this was a little bit of a new potential opportunity. I have to throw this in there just because of like the photos of us with the glasses, and then maybe I'm the only one who knows about the Hanson brothers, but like, sorry, every time I see the three of us with those glasses photos, I think of the Hanson brothers. But really, it's the teamwork thing that really I think has made us has turned what has been my sort of sole consultancy and working on the periphery, with people like Dave and Neil, into this really special entity that is our own. And this is where I'm going to move away from the slides and move into chatting.
Well, if I could ask you to back up on the teamwork slide just for a second. I think you were talking earlier about
Or
No,
this
no,
one?
no, no. The teamwork makes the dream work. I think what you talked previously about how you didn't have the graphic skills, but yet you still make these PowerPoints that you show me 5 minutes before the meeting, with no vetting from the art director. So I'm just going to throw that out there that we're going to have a little post powwow about why I'm even here. So
I mean,
Well, we're getting into that part. I really tried to put like
Okay.
we've got half an hour left for me to turn the steer, for me to turn things over to you guys. So definitely, like, let's open it up and rip off
I
the
am
Band-Aid.
wincing through this whole thing, and we're gonna have a postmortem. But
This-
let's keep going.
is the title
The-
Jason Sklar roast?
The gist is there. I'm really
All right,
enjoying this.
and I promise to the audience of folks who are still there, it's it's right now pretty much gonna stop with the my presenting and get into the more interesting stuff, which is getting Dave and Neil to chip in here, and this is the sort of the transitional phase. We've been growing over the past couple of years. We've been, it's not just the three of us anymore, but like we've got a whole bunch of folks that we work with now, and it's been really cool. But it is always time to reflect, and as I said, sort of in the abstract of the show, like, we've asked ourselves questions, we've made certain decisions along the way, and we thought we'd share some of them with you. And I've got some sort of pre-made questions for us, but I'm also happy to open up the chat line, as it were, and take questions from the audience. Feel free to dive into the discussion and listen to some of the questions, and then think of your own, or if you've got some burning questions, throw them out there, and they'll pop up on our screen, I believe. The first question, though, I want to kind of, just to ground, sort of the how we all met, Dave and Neil, and I'll start with Neil first. Think about, look, I've gone through these sort of, the external situation that you found yourself in, personally, your well-being, how you were, and, what your goals were in terms of like career or, achievements. So when you and I really started talking more seriously about joining forces and coming up with a partnership, can you just like tell us a little bit about where you kind of were on these dimensions?
I think I can jump in there and add something to that mix. But for me, after going through many years of working on product that were multi-year investments, especially where you're just sinking your heart and soul into something that could work out, could not work out. Now, I've been fortunate enough to work on a number of those that did work out, but they, in a games career, those are sprinkled throughout your career. And I've certainly, had my fair share of, well, yeah, you spent many years, but that didn't work out. So I was kind of at, coming off actually one of the titles that I was most proud of in terms of the quality product and the graphics, which was Drop Zone. And it just didn't catch the right audience and didn't work out. So I was at a point in my career where, boy, I really invested a lot into that. But I also wanted, after that I felt like more of a change, taking my knowledge built over, 20 odd years and diving in and having just little tastes in different teams and helping out without having that crushing multi-year investment. And I wasn't sure how I was going to like it, but we're now 2.5 years into this thing and I'm still enjoying it. I'm still enjoying diving in those 4-week projects, those 6 months projects, and really helping them out with being somewhat shielded from that. Oh my gosh, it's all on the line, with this product. So that to me has been the biggest surprise in a good way with all this.
And Neil?
Yeah. So from my perspective, there's a couple phases of my time at Backflip, and one of those phases, probably like the early parts of Dragonvale World. I just was buried in like 3 people's worth of work, and trying to do my darndest. And I really identify with Jay's whole like achievement lens and being kind of obsessed with that. And I've spent a lot of my life, sort of, being focused on that and sort of quarreling with the pros and cons of that. But I burn out super hard. And I had to kind of make a lens, a sort of flip my perspective on Backflip, which I was able to. And, I transitioned my sense of purpose there a lot more towards my personal connections there, and bringing as much to I could, to the studio emotionally every day. And not necessarily like, Dave mentioned, getting as wrapped up into the success or the failure of the game, realizing you can only do your part. And so I was tired in a lot of ways, despite I was actually on a really emotional high and doing really well at the time. But the big thing for me, and this is a weird crux about the game industry, is I've always made my own games. I've always made my own games on the side. I taught myself to code in college. And so that level of creative fulfillment, working on a project for 3 years, one single project that you only have so much impact on, it just wasn't for me in the long term. And so one of the biggest reasons that I left is, like Dave said, all the eggs in one basket. If all my eggs were going to be in one basket, I wanted to be steering the ship. I wanted to be in control of my own fate because I had the confidence in myself and the people I could put around me to kind of take control of my fate financially, but also time-wise. It was all about getting more of my time back and also having the legal ability to make my own games. And if I was able to publish them someday, not have to worry about that. And so that was a big part of it for me.
Cool. And just a note as well, I see, if you have the questions or whatever, I think they're going to start dropping in. I've got a bunch of sort of pre-seeded questions I'm going to start marching through with the gang. But I'm, definitely open. Throw out your questions or whatever. We can go back and forth, or we can just let the group conversation dominate. That's fine too. But both of you talked a little bit about like breaking out of your comfort zone in terms of like you've been doing something a certain way for a while. And it sounds like, Neil, you can correct me if I'm wrong or talk to me. Like it sounds like me, like it had to happen for you. Like you just weren't going to go back to the way that it was before and just join up with another studio. But what kind of like fear, like what were the things that might have been stopping you or made you maybe hesitate to think that this was something that you could do? Were there things that that you worried about before you sort of made this kind of transition?
Oh yeah, I mean it's probably the same number one that everyone worries about, money. So I was, I'm a penny pincher. I've saved a lot of money. I've done decently for a young like single person most of my life, things like that. But it was just the unknown, the fear of the unknown, because I was transitioned to kind of a UX designer, but was still very much a game designer, having never been a consultant in my entire life. My big thing was like, am I going to starve? Like, am I going to go out and fail and have to go get another job at a studio in a pinch where I have to work somewhere that maybe is less than ideal? I mean, I had all kinds of thoughts because initially our conversations were super loose. So the other thing was, is there even enough work there that Jay can find me? Because at the beginning, it was really piggybacked off Jason Sklar Consults. And I was kind of, your new designer guy. And that's really how kind of UXIF started. And then we became partners, and then Dave came on and things like that. But it was just a totally wild world. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. And that's very scary. But yeah, it definitely hit that breaking point for me. The other thing that was tough, and I'll quickly hand it over to someone else. I had made really great emotional connections with people at Backflip. I was working side by side, despite some of the game dev shenanigans that can burn you out. I was working side by side with my closest friends, people that are still my closest friends to this day. And as much as I, love Jay and now, love Dave, I didn't know these guys very much. And so it was not like we were, Jay and Dave, they're a little bit more 20-year, drinking buddies. But for me, it was kind of jumping into a new group and what that emotional transition would be like, not working side by side with people that I had for 5 years. So the emotional side of it as well.
Dave, breaking out of your comfort zone.
I think the getting out of the comfort zone, the transition I worried most about was after, 20 odd years working in the studio with everyone around, and, me being an art director for a majority of that time and being able to go behind the screen and point, which is really what I do the best. The big shift for me was, this was 2.5 years ago, so there was no COVID at that time. But transitioning from a work from home and making that, working with this person, like I'd done outsourcing and working with remote folks, but not with kind of day-to-day partner interaction, primary artists working on a project here. So that was a big challenge. And the first time, let's say 6 months, that was whoa, is this going to be the thing? This is really different. But we stuck with it. And Neil and I were in on a kind of our art best practices chat where we were really trying to flesh out all the things and capture so that when we onboard new people, we were really working hard on that. It opened my eyes. We had an hour-long meeting earlier today, and I'm like, man, how much we've grown and how much we're able to, in a lot of ways, duplicate that in-studio interaction. is really like, we've learned a lot of lessons over the past 2.5 years, and I really do feel like I've gotten quite a bit of that back of what I missed working in studio, based on just how we kind of interface now, which is actually, in the age of COVID. I remember back in January, February, March, when a lot of folks were going and working remotely and really struggling with it. And I somewhat felt like, well, man, I've already gone through myself this awkward phase of how do you work remotely. And it made me appreciate that even more, just about that day-to-day interaction, the tools we use, how we kind of, again, duplicate that in studio, certainly on the creative side. And that meeting today really, really kind of highlighted that for me. But that was the biggest risk and worry and thing to deal with was moving from studio to remote with UXIF.
Yeah, that came to fruition with me as well. I knew it would hit me, but I vastly underestimated how strongly it would hit me. In the first few months, just to speak on Jay's comment about checking in on your mental health, the first few months I was sad and emotional all the time, and sometimes I just cry for no reason. I didn't understand it. And it took me a while to figure out this, like those tiny little things of saying hi to people in the hallway and stuff like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and not having that, even though I love these guys, it was really tough. But like Dave said, we've worked really hard and continue to try and push that culture in our company as well.
I want to get back one of the things that sort of warms my heart in a way that, like, it's awesome that it's happening, but that I'm glad I don't have to be part of it, is this the process, like coming up with a process and really taking these learnings that we've been doing and kind of painfully learning in some ways, but also being inspired by, right? This wasn't just this wasn't just like a post-mortem where you just talk about all the ways we failed and how with this new process we're going to be better. It was actually kind of an inspiration to go through and remind yourself. For all of us, iteration, organic development is kind of fundamental to our DNA. But now, as we're aging as a company, we're trying to move on from there. And how do you feel like we deal with these challenges? Because I think a lot of folks, especially folks who are in smaller studios, indies, maybe working on their own, it's, there's this tension between you want everything to be this really cool because you're comfortable with it, you're familiar with it, you've had some success with it, this iterative and organic approach, it just makes sense. What kind of tensions, emerge? How do you think we've made some of the right decisions? Should we have been process oriented earlier? Or what are the disadvantages of maybe waiting a little bit longer for us to go from organic and everything's a special case to more process oriented?
Yeah, I think one of the splits there for me is it's not necessarily the camp of iteration and rigid process, right? I think what we've been able to do, and it has taken us some time, we definitely tripped in the beginning and we've continued to learn, right? But you can still have all of that great iterative, not this rigid time box type of work, but with best practices that guide it, right? And that's really just a thing. The growth of that has been organic at our company in terms of you don't know what you don't know. And at the beginning, Jay and I were kind of, heading up the UX, and I think we were doing wireframes and Lucid Chart, which is laughable to me at this point. But we were doing the best we could. And so I think one of the best things we've done is put a big focus on that process and developing how we work smarter. And then going back and documenting that, right? Not for the sake of it, but in a way that's useful for the team. And that's the, effort we've been in, most recently, is really just capturing, what works and doing that in a dynamic way, right? Where it's not, this is how it's done, but it's sometimes there is a case by case, but it's not everything is a snowflake, right? And we're kind of, chiseling the wheel each time.
Dave, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I'm looking at some of the questions coming in the comment feed. And so I'm happy to sort of talk a little bit about some of those, but Dave, you're a process guy. What are you thinking?
I haven't caught up. I'm going to catch up on those questions next. On the process side,
that was the one I was going to go for. Yeah.
So no, which one is it? Are you talking about?
You just posted it up on the screen. You a little pop up, a Twitter pop up or whatever, just popped up.
Oh, I see it. It's right in front of me. giant.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to work on the UX of the whole presentation thing because that was so obvious. What factors do you think through when looking to add partners? You want me to speak to that, or you want to start?
I want to throw that out because it actually dovetails nicely into the sort of the question that I was going to talk about, which is basically like into the nuts and bolts of like partnership, ownership, and compensation. And so, the gist of the question that we're getting here is, you've got your friends here that you want to start a company with, but like, what kind of factors go into it, and really, money and ownership. Like being able to talk frankly about that and expectations amongst your friends and having those uncomfortable discussions, we can harken back to those. I mean, these discussions are ongoing, obviously, for us, but in the context of the question from our audience, starting a company with friends, what are some of the things that we had to get right from the beginning?
This is now my third partnership, and this is an important. This is a key one, because how you kind of set up those expectations up front is really important. And communication. I really and all this is again my third partnership. All of them have had their pros, their cons, their ups, their downs, and so none of them have been the same. I want to speak to this one in particular, though. As always been a willingness to be upfront, be straightforward. We all share. This is an equal partnership, and I'm like that. That I think is also that can make things easier when starting a company with your friends. Strive to find friends where you are on equal footing, you are peers, and that up front. And you strive to kind of maintain, that parity as you move forward. I do think that because when it's not that way, there are some cases where it makes sense not to have it that way. But I also think that presents additional challenges along the way in terms of communication, expectations, compensation as you go forward. So it is easier to find, your equals and have everybody kind of believe in that and push forward.
And we front loaded some of those challenges. Yeah, Neil, I'm going to turn it over to you, but we're really doing that and making sure that, like, in theory, but also like as defined, we are going to be equal partners, share equally in the revenue and share equally in the decision making. It meant that, like, practically there were serious kind of like awkward implications, like, and when we started up. And Neil, I'll let you. Like, I'm thinking of a couple, but you should go in because I know we had a lot of discussions about this sort of thing because we wanted to keep it very exactly equal.
Yeah, so I mean, a bit to the question of like what you're thinking through when you're like looking to add partners. So kind of before you got to that point, obviously trust and communication and that's really the way we resolved it. Like Dave said, which was a lot of upfront communication. Because just to give you a peek into my head, like, I'm 29, right? So I'm much younger than these old fellows here. And they have much different financial needs than me. They have families. I don't. And so it was definitely a thought in my mind before we had those conversations was like, am I going to be considered equal? Like, I know, and I even struggled as a young person to feel like I maybe was bringing equal stuff to the table at the beginning. And now I've, learned my value a little bit more, and these guys help reinforce that. But it was really those open kimono is what we call them, conversations, and our willingness to have them early and often, which is really tough. And like specifically for me, it was tough. And the other thing too was we have different needs on our time and things like that. And a big one for me was I was very nervous about kind of telling these guys up front, but I was like, I don't want to work full time. I don't intend to work full time. I really need this extra time to do my own projects and make my own games and things like that. And I was very nervous about how that was going to like slice and dice ownership or how that was going to be perceived. And really the only way to solve that is to throw it out there. And these guys were super receptive, and still felt that, we all in the time that we have bring equal amounts to the table. And so that was a big blessing for me, but something I was really nervous about.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think that we all kind of came to terms, and for me, it was the cash flow situation, just in that, we had like long term, I could totally see it. I'd never financed anything in terms of like, taking loans out to, finance my living or whatever. So like I wanted to bootstrap this from a cash, at least some minimal cash flow. And so my needs and and so that presented some awkwardnesses that we had to deal with early on where we sort of, well, Jason will maybe take a little bit more and all that sort of stuff. And I think that kind of hamstrung us a little bit. I mean, I think in some ways maybe it was just necessary just because I really just couldn't have focused as much on the business. But like moving away from that, as quickly as possible, I think definitely helped. But also to Neil's point, the whole, like, it's the three-legged stool, really. It's like, we are all as a whole greater than the sum of the parts. But more importantly than that, actually, like, we can't even stand up if we don't have the three legs. And so it's not a matter of, is so-and-so putting in their correct amount of hours or whatever this week. It's, what are our responsibilities? Can we do them in a way that makes this business both profitable for us to keep doing and enjoyable so that we don't want to find other opportunities? And so far, so good in some ways, although we definitely have, challenges ahead of us in terms of, where we go next and what we want to do, what we want to do with the company. Another one from Discord, biggest change from working at a company to being in consulting. We talked about this a little bit in terms of just like the practicality of the remote type of thing, but maybe there's some other vectors to think about.
I want to jump in on and kind of touch on this, but for me, the quality of our clients have varied, but as of late, and especially as of this last run, we've had a couple of fantastic client experiences. And I chalk that up to they were looking for folks to come in and be a part of the team, and enhance it in a way where they couldn't keep up, but they were not looking for consultants to come in and just be over here, do what we tell you to do. That they brought us in early enough and shared with us the problems they needed to solve and met with us on such a kind of a frequency, and really did. There was very much that you are now part of the team. And we brought in some junior members in to the actual week-to-week meetings, and some of those junior members started leading the meeting from our side. It gave us a really big boost in terms of growth and trust. But I always find out the most challenging is when you're going into a situation as a consultant, is that client looking for a consultant just to kind of solve this one issue, get in, get out, go away, or are they looking for to really kind of develop that connection? And we've had some really good clients, especially as of late.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's definitely the sort of emotional side, and getting as close as we can to having those sort of people by our side. The other one too, and it's not necessarily this is slightly off the question. It's not necessarily a consultant, but being able to steer your own ship, right? You're not, like Dave mentioned, not being tied to the success of any given studio or any given singular game. And for me, it was like hugely the variety. I mean, I spent 3 years working on the same game. And then in the first 6 months with Jay, I worked on 6 different games, and I had a smaller impact. I mean, that's from a creative perspective, you do, depending on, and we're developing bigger and longer term partnerships. But if you think about it in terms of consulting, you do have to kind of decide if you're okay with it's kind of a breadth versus depth thing. You will help more people as a consultant, and we try to help them a lot, but usually the engagements are naturally smaller, right? And so your impact on a product may be smaller than you're used to necessarily in a studio, but you'll be able to put that touch and that help to a lot more things, and help a lot of other people make their games better. And that's really rewarding. I mean, making your own game great is really cool. But a lot of what we do is help other people kind of really fulfill their creative and business goals.
And I think where the partnership really helps for this is that we've worked engagements that we haven't liked, and we've worked engagements that we have liked more. And by if you're just sort of on your own, you're not necessarily reflecting on that and taking the time to to understand. And then we've also engaged folks to help us with strategy and strategic planning, because the thing is that working in consulting meant something very different in 2017 than in 2020 for us. We were running very differently. And being able to, so it's really, if you're thinking about going to consulting, it's a little bit, it's not this monolithic thing like you're going to start consulting one. I mean, it could be that you're a niche expert, you've got your game wired tight, and you're going to just do it. But for us, because we've been partners, we've given ourselves feedback, we've evolved, and then now we're strategizing to get the kinds of workplace that we want. It looks like we got Jay back in here. Hey, Jay.
Yeah, I just chimed in to, make Neil feel even younger and completely for the rest. Why y'all brought a kid on, I don't understand. But, aside from that,
I can put my Neil glasses on. Dave, where are your glasses, man?
Heather said she for glasses because the glare was on her screen, the last one, and I was like, well, you need better old person glasses like mine because I have trifocals with glare protection. So, no, we've got about 5 or 10 more minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody got their questions answered. And we did have one that come in. Where'd it go? All right, there we go. From Mechalina on Twitch, when should you consider going with a consultant versus adding additional headcount or going with contractors?
Oh, well, the answer to that is obvious. You should always go with the consulting firm.
Boom.
Every time. Every time.
I'm sorry, but yeah, it's
like printing money. Yes.
So maybe we should just talk a little bit about like how over the past couple of years we found, because we do turn down work or we do refer work out. Like there are certain social circumstances where it's just not appropriate to have us on as a consultant. And in fact, like there's kind of a hybrid answer to this too. Like we've worked engagements specifically where we know that we've been forthcoming. They know that their strategy is to hire in someone full time, but it's just like for certain niche types of expertise and it's just hard to get that person, or it takes a while to find the right person. And working with even if your goal is is to get the headcount, which almost inevitably for us when we work with larger teams, we always are like, you need to get some senior UX folks in there full time. But finding them, hiring them, that's another deal. And so we can help that as well. Sometimes you want to do the hybrid approach, which has worked well for us too, where maybe you have one person, but that person is either junior or maybe even senior, but they're only one person. And as it turns out, UX, actually, when you have people to riff and stuff like that, you can, having that person to riff with, and it'd be a different consulting engagement. But really, I just needed. I wish I knew what your role was, and I can't remember the name of the person asked, because that would help as well. Like, are you the head of studio, or are you, trying to make those like math model calculations and things like that? But the try before you buy is also nice too. I mean, yeah, it's a little steeper price than what your monthly burn for a full-time head would be. But try before you buy is kind of nice as well, and you can use that to educate yourself and improve your processes. And in fact, like early on, a lot of our work was, the intention was, again, we're going to be here for a month or two. We're going to help train you up so that you all can do a better job on your own, and come back to us when you need us. But bringing a consultant in, especially if you're not as familiar with the discipline, can help a lot as well. So you can use that strategically to understand it better and figure out who you need to hire or how you need to staff.
I mean, I'll chime in just a little bit on that too, since I run a niche consulting firm. A lot of times, we had somebody this morning talking about how you don't want to go out and hire full-time people if you can't actually employ them full-time. It's not fair to them either. A lot of times my team gets brought in on the business side early in a project. And, I know studios who bring in teams like, UX is fine, almost like before they go get funding, so they can have somebody look at the project and go, okay, how much time are we going to need? What are we going to need on this? And so it's not always necessarily that they're in the project, it's that they're there to give you an idea of what it's going to cost. But, Jason, Neil, Dave, and I all have jobs because what we do isn't necessarily a full-time job at every single company out there. Sometimes you're just needed on a short-term basis, and that's where consultants come in versus your full-time folks. So I've got one for Jason, and this is coming from a friend. I have no idea, just randomly popped in here. Starting from scratch is different than adding partners later on. How did you go about determining like the percentages and shares and who gets what? Because it's not, when you're just starting out, I had partners with my first company, and it's really easy then. It's like, okay, it's a third. We're all in this together. But given as you have already been doing this and you had a value built up in the brand and in the company,
For
without
me, it was a no-brainer. Like, I'll let the other two, talk for themselves. But I really like. Sure, there could have been Jason Starr Consulting, and I could have hired these two or other folks on as like my top VPs in charge or what have you. But that wasn't the way that I wanted to build. And also, I knew that would be limiting. That would be limiting in terms of if I didn't have co-equals pushing me again. Like, comfort zone is a thing that I return to on and off again. And I'm not good at pushing myself out of my comfort zone. There are things that I should be doing that I won't necessarily do unless I'm being pushed to it. And it's possible you'll have your employees doing that sort of thing. But I wanted the direct accountability of people. And I also thought that 3 people super motivated and heading towards the prize would be way more effective at just one person, focusing on the prize and trying to move everyone else along. And maybe that's just more a testament to my style as well. But very early on, I knew that this was going to be a partnership, and it's going to be an equal partnership.
And I've been in other partnerships where there are other factors at play, such as a big name designer being more of the primary with junior partners attached onto it, or versus being in a partnership where one partner had a significant kind of financial stake, so therefore there needed to be some kind of jiggering around of the percentages, and both of those absolutely made sense. But in this one, going in as equals made the most sense for everybody, and everybody kind of nodded their head. And I will say, it does make, if you can find that, it can make things down the road equal a little bit easier to tackle as they pop up, because you're just approaching it with, some of that other stuff can introduce kind of tension at times, or questions, or need to be kind of addressed as you go when the situation changes. But we've approached it, we've stayed equal, and it just, when you can find that, when you're looking around at friends and everybody's asking, can we do this or do that? That's something I think you should strive for in an ideal, but sometimes it's just not possible. So.
All right, so we got time for one more, and then I'm going to kick you guys out over to the Discord so we can get the next one going. So let's get, for the last question, get really uncomfortable. What was the hardest part about doing this? Be honest.
For me, the hardest part, and I'll be super honest, probably too honest, is that as you can see through my long history that I'm glad people stayed through, so we got the real cool stuff, the meat of it. I've had ups and downs in my career and in my life in terms of like mentally, just like emotionally and stuff like that. And the hardest part, as well, not being a lone wolf anymore and being, part of the pack, is like I've got accountability to these folks, and I need to talk to them about when. So it's been the hard, like that is hard. I have to share more information with them than I otherwise, would have had to share with anyone really, other than my wife and my kids. And that's been hard because I feel like I let the team down and things like that. And we all go through that. Like I'm not just, but
oh no, I mean,
that more than anything has been the hardest part, is knowing that we are all 3 in it and our fates are tied together. And if one of us legs breaks, the stool falls over, and that kind of accountability can be hard.
I think I go back to a couple of things I've already mentioned, and one is suffering through Jason's awful looking PowerPoints that he doesn't share with me. 2, I go back to just, if you've been working in a studio and you got your, just that culture that's in a game studio that develops, it's something you really, really cherish. And, most of my years working in game development, I'd get up every morning saying, I cannot wait to go to work and laugh and enjoy making games with this group, this family that I've been with. So making that transition to the work from home consultancy 2.5 years ago, like that first 6 months was like, man, I really missed that, until at which we started having those moments, and we've gotten, much better to almost really good at bringing some of that culture and feel in, even from remote. So, and almost like now I'm like, we should blog about that, about what we do, because it's a big deal nowadays where folks have been forced in that situation.
Yeah, and for me, I know we're running short on time. For me, it's a quick 2 things. One is it's the pressure So it's a beautiful thing to be able to be in charge of your own fate and the master of your own fate. But it can also be a ton of pressure. And so just feeling that, there's no one sending you a check at the end of the week if you don't make it yourself. And as an achievement focused, maybe even achievement obsessed person, one, you have to let that pressure not crush you. And two, you can't let your job take over your life and be the antithesis of what I came here for, where I'm, working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and which I've been very fortunate that I haven't. And I've balanced that. And the other thing too, is just to be the cold hard truth is, working together in a studio or with people, with coworkers that you think differently from is one thing. Running a studio and that just like intimate connection and reliance on each other, when your brains work sometimes very differently from each other, can be very frustrating. And there's times where I'm sure that it's clear that, I'm irritated about something that someone else is doing, or I'm pissed off about the way this is done. And that's not, I need to, maybe check myself there.
Oh, no, you're justified. I validate you.
It's about being able to work through those things and communicate with each other. And that's the way we overcome it. But it can definitely be challenging because you're all relying on each other, and that connection and reliance is so close, and we're with each other all the time, almost every moment of every day in a way.
All right, guys, I really appreciate y'all being here. And if you got any more questions, anyone out there, pop over to our Discord. It's Indie Game Business, discord.gg/Indie Game Business. We've got channels set up there for post-show chat. Jason is there, I know for a fact. I'm just going to assume Dave and Neil are, or they're not. Either way, one or the other. But we can carry on the chat, ask questions there. I'm going to close this one out and then give us like 2 minutes. And Nathan Blair will be here from Games for Love. They have built a really cool process for, those of us in the industry that have been doing this for a while, want to volunteer and give back to kids using our skills, making games. They've got an awesome program set up, and so he's going to walk us through that. But yeah, thanks for everybody, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a nice day.